We're going to start by considering some of the challenges faced by deaf children and adults who live in diverse linguistic communities. Firstly, we're going to start with an illustration of strange lip patterns. In order to illustrate linguistic diversity, imagine you're 6 years old, you're getting ready for your first day at school. You're excited, you chat to your mum and your sister using your mother tongue, the local language. You also know Kiswahili, the official national language of Kenya, which you speak in the market to your friends and at church. You like speaking these two languages and have no difficulties switching between them. You arrive at school, find a place to sit and wait for the teacher. She arrives, smiles, begins to give instructions and explanations, but you do not understand her. She's not speaking Kiswahili or the local language, she's speaking English. What do you do? Now imagine you're a deaf child in this community. You have begun to make sense of the lip patterns of the language your family speaks. When you go to the market, you can see that the people have different lip patterns. You don't know they are speaking Kiswahili, but you watch your mother's lip patterns change when she buys fruit. Then one day your mother takes you to school, you find a place to sit, and you wait for the teacher to start speaking. But you notice her lip patterns are completely different from the ones you have begun to understand at home and the ones you have seen the fruit sellers use. What do you do? It's recognised that clear language policies which provide guidance on the language of instruction in multilingual communities are key to delivering quality basic education. The same is true for deaf education. Yet it is estimated that half of the world's 58 million out-of-school children live in communities where the language of schooling is rarely, if ever, used at home. Approximately 2.4 billion people, nearly 40% of the world's population, speak languages which are not used in education. As we saw in the diversity lecture, in some low-income countries it is estimated that only 1 to 2% of deaf children attend school. For those children who do attend school, one of the greatest challenges they face is the difficulty in accessing the language used, whether this is signed or spoken. Many children who are not deaf fail to learn the national or the international languages taught in schools, such as Hindi, Kiswahili, or English and Portuguese. The use of official languages in school is considered to be one of the reasons for high rates of school failure in many countries. Educational failure due to having to learn in an unfamiliar language in school tends to be worst in poor rural areas of low and middle income countries and in minority ethnic populations. Many parents may be unable to help their children with academic learning, especially if they are not fluent in the official language of the country and if the family is affected by hunger, poor nutrition and poor health. Sign language is key in low and middle income countries. According to the World Federation of the Deaf, sign languages are the natural languages of deaf people. This means that sign language is considered to be the mother tongue or first language for deaf children, even though the opportunity to learn sign language formally may only arise late in life, if at all. The World Federation of the Deaf also claims that each natural sign language used by the deaf community is part of the country's cultural, social, religious and historical heritage. The documentation of natural sign languages requires a great deal of linguistic knowledge, good infrastructure and strong political will. It also requires deaf people to be able to meet each other regularly to advance their sign language skills. In many countries, this only happens in schools for the deaf. As I have already highlighted, children develop literacy skills most easily in their first language. The World Federation of the Deaf argue that the first language for a deaf child is sign language. Article 24 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities specifies that signatories to the convention are required to facilitate the learning of sign language and the promotion of the linguistic identity of the deaf community, and to ensure that the education of persons, and in particular children who are blind, deaf or deaf-blind, is delivered in the most appropriate languages and modes and means of communication for the individual and in environments which maximise academic and social development. Since deafness is a low incidence impairment and deaf children constitute a relatively small proportion of school children, it can be logistically difficult to meet their language needs in this way. Now we're turning to an example from Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea in the South Pacific, an island, is the world's most linguistically diverse nation with 823 living languages spoken by a population of 5.2 million people. So multilingualism is the norm. And only 50,000 people speak English as their first language. In 1995, the government changed the medium of education from English to vernacular languages in pre- and primary schools. The bilingual method was recommended as a way of introducing English gradually until, at high school, the curriculum was entirely taught in English. Paul is a 12-year-old deaf boy in a primary school in Papua New Guinea. He uses multiple forms of communication. The teacher uses some signs, but her sign language is not fluent. But Paul has learnt to lip read well. One of his classmates, who is not deaf, translates the teacher's English into the local language during maths lessons for Paul. The two children have developed a gestural communication system between them, and it is clear that they also use some of the sign language used by the teacher. The official language is the local language, but now at grade 7 the language has changed to English, and Paul has found this very difficult. His maths ability is, however, reported to be on a par with his peers. Paul has adapted to this difficult linguistic environment with his excellent lip reading, the help of his teacher's broken sign language, and his friends' ability and willingness to translate. Meanwhile, his classmates continues lip speaking to him in their local language. In Burkina Faso in West Africa, Madame Kafando runs a school for children who are both deaf and not deaf. All children learn to communicate in sign language and in French in the inclusive preschool. There are 2 teachers in the classes, one who communicates by speaking French, the other who's deaf and communicates in fluent sign language. Some deaf children will start at the inclusive preschool but are moved to separate classes for children who start their schooling late and need extra support with language acquisition, both oral and sign. They have the support of sign language interpreters and later rejoin the main school, while other children, mostly those who are hard of hearing, are able to continue in the inclusive classes without this additional support. Now I'm going to think about language and its relationship with information and communication technology and how this affects deaf children. Basic literacy skills are essential in order to be able to access information and communication technology. ICT is becoming more central to communication, especially in the workplace. Being able to use ICT is therefore becoming an essential aspect of citizenship. Deaf people who do not have a means of communication through spoken or signed language or through ICT are less able to gain knowledge, express their ideas and opinions, and make demands. ICT has great potential to help deaf people access basic information for their survival, as well as participating fully in education and employment. ICT can provide deaf people with the opportunity to connect with friends and so reduce their isolation. It also enables their participation in political, economic, social and cultural life. Those who cannot access ICT because they are poor, live in rural areas or lack education are likely to experience frustration and exclusion. In Uganda, a joint UNICEF-UNESCO project is underway to develop a policy on ICT. For deaf people, this will provide guidelines for accessible communication, such as multimedia publications in Ugandan Sign Language. Other innovations that are being explored include technology which enables speech to be translated into signed languages. This lecture has highlighted some aspects of deaf people's lives in linguistically diverse contexts. I hope it has aroused your curiosity to learn more about the way in which deaf people negotiate such linguistic diversity.